The reason this falls into Grayman is you got to figure the average person spends a third to a half of their life inside their home. If you sleep for 8 hours a day, that's a third of your life. Anybody conducting espionage or counterintelligence in a foreign country has to have a place to live and usually a covered business that they're in. These individuals won't even usually spend 25% of their life at that location. But that's the one location every day that they will most likely spend the most of their time. That's the place they're most vulnerable, the one place they can be tracked to the easiest due to repetitive trips. Surveillance can be easier there, so it's the most deadly place against you where you have to stay. So like always, I'll cover a few things that you probably haven't thought about. It'll be a little more in depth on some of them. A lot of these can be applied to your residence for purposes of burglary, surveillance, whatever. Take the pieces you need. If you haven't heard any of these before, I'd say listen to the first and second one. First one gives you an overview. Second one's kind of a detailed, broad stroke to different aspects of getting into the whole Grayman business. All the other pieces are individual segments that focus on different areas. So let's start with parking. Whether it's at your home or anywhere else, the one thing you never want to do is pull in. You should always back in. And that looks normal, so it's easy to do. The reason why is it's just an easy way to escape, an easy way to get out. 1 to 2 less movements in moving your vehicle. It doesn't matter if you have the lift kit, tires, and engine to jump a curb. While that might be necessary, there's no reason to set yourself up to do that. You could draw attention to yourself, you potentially could cause damage to your vehicle. It's just unneeded. So when you're parking at your home, I know a lot of people only have a single driveway. Maybe it's 1 car wide. Maybe you got a fence around your property that you can't bust through. And while that's not ideal, that's a definite place you'd want to back into. But an ideal situation would be a circle drive where you have 2 points of entry so that you don't have to worry about backing in. That's 2 places that somebody has to try and secure to block you in. And if you set it up correctly, even if you have plants out in the middle of the circle drive area, you should be able to cut through in the middle to get out. Because just think, if somebody came to your house with even 4 vehicles, the most likely scenario is that 2 of the vehicles will be used to block the road going left to right out of your residence or whatever place you're leaving. And then the other 2 would be used to block those 2 entrances. If you can get out that second one between the vehicles, you still have a way out. You don't necessarily have to use that road. But that's just a pointed idea to look at. Now, if you look at the ground, the most likely coverings on the ground are either going to be dirt, grass, or some sort of rock or stone. This is discounting the fact that you have all of your property paved or concreted. You might have a huge driving area that's concreted, but you probably have some other natural portions to it. I personally don't like dirt. Yeah, it's dirty, and it's nice that it leaves footprints of people, but it can leave your footprints too, and it's not like you're not going to walk around your property. So if you have footprints left around your property, especially a lot of them for those work boots or whatever you're wearing a lot, or if you have multiple people in your house, it's not too difficult to identify shoe sizes, weights of people, and probability of the ages, or at least physical sizes and number of people at that residence, and who does the most work around the house. That works more against you than it does for you. Grass isn't bad either. In a lot of places, grass and the dirt combination there is pretty hard, pretty tough to get through. Some places it's really soft, or if you have like a new neighborhood with sod. So the upside to that is, if anybody drives on it, you'll probably see the impressions. If you have wildlife in your area, whether it's bunny rabbits or elk, depending on your familiarity with them and your tracking skills, the nice thing about grass is identifying trails, patterns, tracks, whether it's out in the front of your house or in a 5-acre yard or whatever. What's good about that, besides the availability of hunting, is if wildlife presence disappears, there's a reason for it. Now, it could be seasonal, it could be migration, it could be hibernation, it could be hunting season and they know better, or it could be they were spooked. So that's, not a bad thing. Personally, I prefer gravel, anything that's crunchy. The reason why, anybody drives on it, I'm going to hear it. People don't realize how much they drag their feet until they walk on a loose surface. When people walk around here on gravel on the side of the road, I hear it. I got little bunny rabbits out here that my dog looks at out the window and thinks are the greatest things ever. But if they see her and get spooked and they start hopping away, about half the time I hear them. If they're full grown, I definitely hear them. So while you don't gain the advantage of footprints, you do get the advantage of sound, which is great at night because sound carries and travels. But what you can do is you don't have to have flat ground. I have areas where I have piled up loosely gravel in certain places that would be a likely place somebody would come through. What's nice about that is somebody drives a vehicle through there, they're not going to think about that, and then I'm going to see that somebody drove their car up on my yard, and I want to know what the fuck for. So there's another idea you can look at. You can also look at putting debris fields in, piles of leaves, areas where there's old dead sticks. This, of course, is completely dependent on your situation. If you live in an upkept homeowners association, high-end community, there's not going to be a lot of that available. But some people live out in town or out in the country or have their own acres of property, and you can really strategically plant leaves, twigs, whatever in areas that you're not going to mess with, so that if somebody comes through there and walks on them or drives on them repetitively, it's noticeable to you. And if you lay it out correctly and it sits there over time and kind of settles, you don't really notice it if you're the guy trampling on it. And if you want to go that aspect, make sure you get plenty of twigs and thin branches and stuff out in an area where you can let them dry out for several months to make sure they're the kind that would burn really great, because those are the kind that are going to break really easy, be a lot more noticeable. So that's something to look at. Now, probably the most important object in or around your yard is going to be your mailbox. My mailbox is probably about 30 or 40 feet from my front door, like it would be in most residential neighborhoods. That might be true for you. I grew up in a place where my mailbox was probably 60 yards from my front door, but it was still at the end of a 1-acre property. So if you have a mailbox in a distance relative to those ideas or somewhere in the middle, this might be a very good practical application for you. 2 things you want to know. First, you want to know the exact distance of that mailbox. And like with other areas I'm going to discuss here right after that, you should have at least 3 vantage points to that mailbox from inside your home. And if that means the front door, a window a couple rooms over, that's a significantly different angle, and then upstairs or the other side of the door or something like that. And preferably one on each side of the house where you can see that mailbox. And you need to know the exact distances, and here's why. Part of it is engaging a target. If you had to shoot or return fire to something. The reason why knowing it's important is when you go to the range, you're either indoors and got that electronic range you can move back and forth to a certain distance, or you got a known distant range with steel targets that you're shooting rifles on or pistols. Now, even if you're not a high-speed shooter with advanced marksmanship training or working on long-range precision, or consciously think about the fact that you're 15 yards out, there's a subconscious effect there of knowing the distance and building the confidence up and realizing what you're shooting at. In a way, you could almost consider it cheating. I mean, it would be a lot nicer if they could just run those targets out at different distances for you and tell you after the fact. You'd probably learn more. But if you put that conscious thought into your head when you're going to the range and practicing shooting, you realize that you learn a pretty good idea if you use silhouette-sized targets of the distance you're at and what your ability to shoot a target is at that range, which are, of course, in non-influence decisions where you're scared and you got stress and you got adrenaline and all these things. So, if you've got a mailbox at 40 feet or 7 yards, however you want to measure it, you have a good range to practice at. You have a good idea what you can do. If you're a person like me that has a rifle with 100-meter zero using 55 grain boat tail rounds out of an AR-15, then you know you have a point of aim, point of impact. Also at 7 yards, give or take a few feet, to where if you align your front sights properly, especially if you're using a CSAT sight like I do and put it on their forehead and pull the trigger, that's where the bullet's going to hit them, which is why I use 100-meter zero for surgical shooting, which is part of what I used to do. Not saying you have to have 100-meter zero. You can use 200, 50, 25, whatever. It's just an example. So if you know that distance, then you can approximately judge a little bit past it and definitely in front of it the distance to a target. Now, maybe you don't have to shoot them. Maybe you're just observing somebody and you want to report it. Okay, well, you know that they were 45 feet away. So when a law enforcement officer comes to you and you give a description and you say they're 45 feet away, I imagine they're going to say, how the hell do you know they're 45 feet away? And like, I measured the distance to my mailbox and I know that they were 45 feet away. Or they were standing roughly right here. I know that's 45 feet, so this is probably 42. That actually can help them. This is where height plays in. Height plays into the fact that you might think you know the height of your mailbox, or maybe everybody's the same, but most people don't actually know that. So if you take the height of your mailbox, or maybe you got a post that sticks a little higher, or some very obvious feature you can see from several angles, and you go, that's exactly 60 inches, 5 feet, which is really high, or that's 48 inches, that's 4 feet. Well, if it's 60 feet out or 45 feet out and it's 4 feet high, yeah, there's a little deviation there on your guess of height. But if it's 4 foot high and somebody's standing near it and you realize that 1/3 of that person is taller, then that should tell you they're 6 feet tall. And if it's less than that, you might know that they're 5 feet or 5.5. And you can actually get a fairly good estimate if you do some practice. Throw your kids out there. You know how tall they are. Do a little bit of practice. So that way, if you have to make a report, or if you're an intelligence officer on an espionage location doing operations, that would go in a report you would write on an intelligence report. You'd be able to say, at 45 feet, I had an individual who's 6 feet tall. Now, you add those factors that are very accurate to a physical description, can really help what you're doing in an intelligence report, but also helps you in the law enforcement arena assisting them. Because as we talked about before, it's great if you can give a description of what they're wearing. That is very helpful. But we know you can ditch that clothing very quickly. All you got to do is throw your shoes and socks in the trash and walk around barefoot here in Arizona because it's summertime. Take your shirt off, turn your shorts inside out, and you're a whole nother person. So there's something to look at. Now, you can do these exact same things with major objects in your yard. Some people have bird feeders, water features, little ponds, a specific palm tree. Maybe you got clay pots or flower pots of some type, front, back, whatever. Maybe you got some old farming or mining equipment for aesthetic value like some people do out here in Arizona. And you can pick a few of those objects and you can do the same thing. Height can be important if it's far out, if you want to estimate targets and give description. But if they're close in, it doesn't play as much of an issue. But the distance is important to know what you're engaging for target. Now, if you've got the ability to do this, say you got buddies with land or you got your own land and you'd like to set up a little shooting course, imagine now if you could start where you decide your front door would be on your house, and then you go place targets out at different distances and different heights that match the layout of your yard or that area. You've just created a cool little shooting scenario for people, and whether you tell them or not, you've actually got something where you can plan and move to escape or evade, move forward or retreat in and out of a location because you have a range set up to practice it. Most people will never look at that and figure out it's your yard. So that's something to look at. That's something you can plan for. You might be able to make that work for you. Now, even if you can't do targets, you don't have the money to shoot a lot, you can simply sit at a table, use graph paper, rulers, whatever, little G.I. Joes, Green Army men, whatever you want, and essentially create a sand table, a little map of yours. You can lay all the stuff out and figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. That's still a little bit of planning and preparation. It's better than doing nothing and works really well for a lot of people. So there's another idea of something to look at. Now, here's something else you can consider. So you have all these objects, or maybe you're going to place objects out there. The more you learn about tactics, moving, what you need to identify, creating choke points, funneling people into areas, creating blockades and defilades, and shields and things like that. Start to learn those things and look them up and read about it. You can actually pre-position items within your yard to force people to do certain things. There's nothing better, especially if you have a two-story house, than moving items in such a way that to them, it looks like that's what I want to go hide behind because somebody's at this window or this side of the house that I can observe or shoot at. But you know if they do that, you've got 2 or 3 other vantage points where you can get clean shots off on them. You got 4 people in your house, that dude's toast. And all you have to do is plan for the defense. And you plan for the defense by first planning for an offense. If you don't have exceptional skill and ability in doing this, and I guarantee most of you probably don't, the first thing you need to do is get on the other side and say, I'm going to surveil my house for a long term, or I'm going to attack my house, or anything like that, and figure out what you would do and what would be ideal. And then those are the things you need to counter. And that's how you're going to plan it out. So you can lay stuff out like that, whether it's bushes, hedges, rocks, piles of dirt, whatever, to force people into choke points and all kinds of things that they're not prepared for. And that actually happens in the espionage world, usually at a business location, because a lot of times they live in apartments or apartment style areas, but they work in business locations and they have to prepare for that kind of stuff. You can also do the same thing in your house with your furniture. That's a whole nother conversation. Now, all these major locations, your goal is to have several vantage points, preferably at least 3. They don't always have to be spread. They could be 3 from one side of the house. If you got a 2-story house, you probably have more options. If you have more obstructions in your yards and more trees, yeah, maybe there's more things for them to hide behind, but there's also more things for you to hide behind, even at a distance, to limit what they can see. But when we're looking at all these things, especially large objects or bushes, anything that could fairly easily hide the average sized man within 7 yards of any point of entry or exit from a facility or building needs to be removed or replaced with something smaller, because 7 yards is a dangerous distance. And you might be thinking, well, I could shoot them. Okay, well, you're assuming that you know they're there and you're assuming that shot's legal. So you need a 7-yard clear area at a minimum, if not 10, to ensure nobody's going to be too close to you. So that's something to look at as well. Now, let's look at some early warning features that you may not thought of. I love the Arbor Day Foundation website. I really do. You can go on there and it'll show you all these little fancy colored things where you fall in your temperate zone in the world, or at least in America, and it'll give you this list of trees that you can plant there and be healthy, and you'll be amazed how many there are. Not only that, they're cheap because they'll just send them to you. Plus they tell you how to plant them, how to take care of them, how far apart to put them, how big they're going to get, and how long it's going to take, and that's wonderful information. Here's what else it'll tell you. It'll tell you if it'll repel certain types of bugs or insects, or if it attracts bees, or if it tends to attract these type of birds. And especially if you know what's in your area, you can get all these things. So why is this important? One of the early warning features that I love to have, and a lot of people use, are bird feeders. $20-$30, you can pick up 3 or 4 bird feeders sometimes, and you get black oil sunflower seeds at Walmart or wherever, about 15 to 16 bucks for a 40-pound bag. And I've been using a 40-pound bag for about 4 months with 2 large bird feeders with fat birds all around, 30 of them all the time. Here's why it's great, especially in an environment like mine, where you can have open hearing access inside or outside your residence. I can hear those birds, whether I'm really paying attention or not, tweeting around, doing their thing, getting on Twitter with each other. But then, when they all take off in flight at once for being startled, you notice. And my dog definitely notices, and many of you probably have dogs that will notice too. When that happens, and me and my dog both notice, we go check it out, because it's a nice little early warning system. Granted, it's daytime only, but it's definitely something to look at. Now let's look at a nighttime system. A lot of people have security lights. What's great about those now is you can get cheap ones for 15 bucks that are solar powered, motion activated, with sticky backs that stick to almost anything you can put anywhere. And they work pretty good. You can get all different types, and I would definitely start looking at all different types, especially solar powered ones. Now what a lot of people do, especially with lights they can focus and put in different directions, they tend to light up their doors, their windows, whatever, so they can see somebody coming in. That only works if you're outside watching them. Or they put one near their door so they can see themselves getting into the door. And a lot of the conscious thought is, well, if some guy was up here trying to get in my front door and the light was on him, he wouldn't do it. Well, that's a foolish thought, because if you put that light there for you and you've had to go up and fiddle with the door, then a guy ain't supposed to be there at night. He's definitely not going to stand out. Plus, you're providing him light to do that. So that's something to think about. So what a lot of people say is, that's no problem. We're going to go ahead and take those security lights and we're going to shoot them out in the yard in certain areas and try to light people up as they approach from a distance. Hey, that's a great idea too. You know, and I know a lot of you probably realize certain areas you got lights going off all the time because rabbits or raccoons or the cats out there. Now let's think back to the earlier portions where we have tactically in place these locations that we've measured distances and heights on, and we know we're going to funnel people and put choke points in. Now we take those security lights for nighttime and we position them in such a way that they light up the areas I want to see if I needed to observe, especially if I can observe from behind the light. So if they look towards the light, they can't necessarily see me due to the blind value and the eye dilation that they're going to receive. And I have a lit up area where I'm either going to engage or observe and see these individuals. The thing is, you set that up all beautifully like that and people see it. All they're going to see is, yeah, this guy's a smart guy who's shooting lights out in the yard. But nobody realizes you put it there for a tactical advantage. It's not just to engage targets, but it's also to escape and evade. Because if you think you're being followed or surveilled, then you can stay up late at night and watch these lights go off and look around, or if you think somebody's coming after you, and you can figure out where they're at. Every few seconds count when you get that little jump on them. So that's something to look at. There's a definite advantage there. From the same point though, you need to have mounted and dismounted observation points of this facility. I keep saying residence, but it could be your business, could be whatever. 3 are preferable, which makes a total of 12. Here's why. You need 3 from within a vehicle distance and a walking distance you can observe with your naked eye. Now, vehicle distance could be in another location, it takes 10 minutes to drive to, but it's only a mile away and you're elevated. But you can see some of the routes coming in, some of the vehicles, some of the patterns of life you're used to seeing. That's nice. Then another one is a point or location where you can drive by to some degree and at least see the area close to it. Walking's the same way. Your close observation points would be within probably yelling distance, talking distance even, if you want to get that close, and then a farther observation point. If you can come up with 3 of each of those, primary, alternate, and supplementary, you're going to come up with 12 different observation points. The catch is, especially with the dismounted ones, is you want those points in a place that you can see from inside your house. But you want to be able to see them in a certain way, like, let's say you have horizontal blinds, which are preferable to vertical blinds for security purposes. And if you picture those in your head and how the strings come down through the side and how little they are, you can take something as simple as a hole punch. You go close to the edge of the window where you'd only expose half your face. The height of it would be about the equivalent of what you would be from a knee because the natural inclination, if you see movement subconsciously, is to look at the physical height the average person would be in that window, so they'll actually be looking above you. And through that little hole where you're not silhouetting yourself, you can look out. And even though it's a little quarter-inch hole or whatever, you can see a huge portion of the landscape. And you should be able to do something like that so that you can see these observation points. That's important in case anybody's ever there and figures it out. It's also so that if you're there and observing your house, you know exactly where you would be looking from, so you can look at that to see if anybody found it. And there should be points where you can observe your house. Plus, with 3 different locations, you get 3 different views in your house. Try to go more for a 360 aspect. If you can come up with 10 points for dismounted, but only 1 for driving, fine, that's what you got to work with, but that's what you have. What's important is you don't want to hit those dismounted points so many times, or mounted points if you're driving off-road out in the country, that you leave specific trails. Notice people are going there all the time. And the other thing is, wherever those points are, unless it's an absolute emergency, you never approach those vantage points from your house or approach the house from those vantage points leaving trails, because those trails are visual indicators that people will see. Those are just observation points. They are not destinations. You have to be able to move out and around and get away from them to get where you need to be, unless you need to escape that way because you have something hidden over there, or you need to assault your house or your business. So that's something to consider as well. Now, the condition of your house should blend. It should be no different than the vehicle, clothing, facial hair, all these things we've talked about before. So if you live in a trailer park, you don't want a $5 million home in the middle of the trailer park. If you live in a $1 million home neighborhood, you're not going to drop a crappy trailer out there. It's going to stand out. So you have to blend. The idea is to draw a little bit of attention away from yourself, meaning I blend, I look very similar to everybody else, and it's not about wealth versus non-wealth. It's about attraction. So if you maintain a certain level of appearance and cleanliness that everybody else does, and weeds pulled like they do or whatever, but they have fancy cars or a better design or different stuff or big old flowers or whatever, and you just don't quite get to the level they are, you appear pretty average. It appears unappealing. So if somebody wants to come there, it's not as appealing. You see nice cars and nice things in a well-manicured place outside, the natural thought is it's probably just as nice inside, probably clean, and they might have nice things too. You see the house next door, the stuff you're showing isn't quite as nice, isn't quite as taken care of. It doesn't have that attraction. So even though it's subconscious, a person will pick the more attractive object. Think about picking up chicks in a bar, or if the ladies listen, picking up guys. You could say whatever the hell you think you want about personality and all this stuff. We go after the physical attraction first. So you want to show also presence, not wealth. So while we're not showing wealth in comparison to the rest of the neighborhood, we do want to show presence, that people are there. And that just needs to match the pattern of life that everybody else has for whatever amount of presence there is.